Linux Luddites, episode 57, for the 11th of October, 2015. Hello and welcome to Linux Luddites, the show where we trial the latest free and open source software and then decide that we like the old stuff better. I'm Joe.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Jesse. And we are halfway through the paddy drought, but don't worry, the rainy season is on the horizon. In this show, we have some news, of course, talking about the Linux Foundation and their ongoing expansion, some kernel developers leaving, a plethora of Google things, and some other items at the end. We have a brief interview with one of the OggCamp founders, and don't forget that the OggCamp applications are still open. But as you heard, we have a guest joining us. So how are things, Andrew?
Things are cold and bleak, and there are whippets. Actually, that's a lie. I've got a West Island Terrier puppy last 3 weeks ago. Took him for his first jabs. He weighed 1.1 kilograms. 2 weeks after, for his second set of jabs, he weighed 1.66.
Wow, that's some serious eating.
I'm so proud of that. I'm just like feeding him bacon and beef and stuff. It's great. Yeah, and other things are good as well.
So I would imagine that most of our listeners know who you are, but just in case they don't, you are known for writing for Linux Voice, formerly Linux Format, Tux Radar podcast once upon a time, and now Linux Voice podcast. I don't know, what else can you tell us about yourself?
That's right. That's pretty much it, to be honest. Scottish amateur universities light heavyweight quarter-finalist in 2001. Appeared on University Challenge, got to the semi-final. But in terms of Linux, really, it is just the magazine, Linux Voice, and the podcast that we do, which is, probably in the top 2 of all podcasts.
Very flattering. And just for my own personal interest, what do you run?
I run Mint. I have got no idea what version it is. I completely follow Clem's opinion that if it's working, don't bother upgrading it. I just hear so many horror stories from Graham, who runs Graham Morrison, who also works on the magazine. He runs Arch, and the number of times that copy comes in late from him because he upgraded something harmless and Arch just broke. I just don't want to. I don't want to chase the bleeding edge. I can't be bothered with upgrading things. If it works, it works. I'm using the Marseille desktop or Mate desktop. Because drop shadows and hardware acceleration and whizzy new paradigms, I can't be bothered with it. Just give me a window and just an application that runs in a window. It'll do. If it works, it works.
That's perfect. Sounds like you'll fit in nicely right here.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, before we do the news, quick shout out to Alex Moonshine and Thomas McCallum for their help with our logo. We have no idea how vector graphics work, and apparently Alex and Thomas do. So that really helped out, guys. Much appreciated. But with that, let's get on with the news. First up then, the Linux Foundation has released a report titled A $5 Billion Value, estimating the total development costs of Linux Foundation's collaborative projects. And this is using the constructive cost model. And it basically boils down to there are an awful lot of lines of code that they estimate would take 1,300 developers 30 years to recreate. And so that works out at $5 billion, which means they estimate that developers get $120,000-ish a year, which sounds pretty nice to me.
There's a lot of estimates in there. A lot of rounding offs and averages and ifs and probablys.
You don't sound entirely convinced by the Linux Foundation's kind of way of working this out. I have to admit, when I saw that it was 41,192.25 person years, I thought that's quite an accurate figure they've come up with there.
Yeah, as I've ranted about this before, but whenever you have estimated data and then you apply a really accurate statistical model to it to 3 decimal places, you're just making a mockery of your methodology. It's just daft. It also assumes that people do things solely because they're being paid for it, when, as we know, a lot of the value that people derive from contributing to free software is just, for the buzz or to improve their CV or just to feel part of a community or to show off.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, I suppose there is a fair bit of development that is amateur, for want of a better word, or at least donated effort. But then if you really look at who develops the Linux kernel, at least, that is mostly fairly big companies, or at least companies. But this is a whole load of Linux Foundation collaborative projects, most of which I didn't even know about. And they're just too numerous to list. I'm looking at this list and it must be about 30 different projects. And we've often talked on the show about how the Linux Foundation is just extending its reach. And I just didn't realize how much of a reach they already have.
Yeah, so there are ones you can pick out, like the automotive grade Linux, Let's Encrypt, Node.js Foundation, Tizen, those ones that people have heard of. But you're right, Open MAMA and the Open Virtualization Alliance and Deno Code and Drone Code and all these, there are loads and loads of them. And as you say, every week we seem to find something else the Linux Foundation has decided to take under its wing or develop or branch out. And we're going to move on to something else they've done in the next news article. But you're absolutely right. There seems to be a lot of things. However, I think it is, I know that we've talked about the methodology they've used and the number of different things they do, but it maybe is useful now and then just to step back and say, while this wouldn't all suddenly disappear and people would remake it exactly how it is now, it just gives you an idea of the scale of what goes on at the Linux Foundation and the number of people who not only collaborate through being paid to do so from some big companies and things, but like you say, from their own time, their own means and desires, they will also contribute. And just to say, this is a huge project and we sort of take it for granted, don't we, really? And no one could ever put £5 billion forward to say, let's redevelop all these things. So it's just maybe, I think, ignoring the finer detail and where everything is, it's interesting just to step back and see and take a look at the bigger picture.
It's also slightly disingenuous of the Linux Foundation to imply that it is the custodian of a $5 billion project when that value, that theoretical $5 billion has already been realised. The drone people, presumably they paid a developer whatever $120,000 a year to work on code for their drone, and they got the code back. It's almost incidental to them that code also went into the Linux kernel and went into other people's projects, when what they actually want is that code to be on their drones. So they've paid for it. They've got it. They own it. The fact that it's worth money to them and has gone into the code base, it might be worthless to anybody else. It's a dodgy way of adding stuff up. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to some dodgy adding up later, I think.
Also from our friends at the Linux Foundation, there's the video series called World Without Linux, which investigates the nightmare alternative reality that Linux was never born, that Torvalds went back to 1984 and killed himself before the Skynet could get before the penguins became self-aware. So the video that I saw of this, so there's a couple relaxing and one of them asked the other a question, and so rather than just Googling it or DuckDuckGoing it, the chap has to get in his car and drive off to the library and look it up there, because without Linux there would be no internet or radio or television or any other means of communicating data, and you wouldn't even have books in your own home. You would have to go to the library for everything.
Yeah, I think you've got the point there. It just seems ridiculous that you would say without Linux nothing would have happened. Like you say, exactly. He could have phoned the library. He could have, had it on a disc. Like when I was a kid, we had, Encarta and stuff on CDs. We had ways of finding this information out. That I wasn't driving to the library every 5 minutes. Dad was basically the Google of the day, but it just seems a little bit over the top and a little bit far-fetched of them to imply that without Linux, there would be no internet and there wouldn't even be a substitute for the internet. I think that's what has got a number of people riled up. That we'll put a link in the show notes to some sort of frosty reception they've got. But it's the idea that if Linux hadn't have happened, BSD wouldn't have done it, or Microsoft wouldn't have done it, or Apple wouldn't have done it, or something else wouldn't have come along and produced a kernel or a way of operating that you can actually have the internet very much like we know it now. It just seems they've seemed to have overstepped the mark a little bit.
Yeah, it's like evolutionary niches. If you look at on different continents, there'll often be a similar animal fulfilling the same kind of niche and preying on the same thing and being preyed upon by a similar thing. But they'll be very different animals because they evolved separately. And you're right, there would have been something probably proprietary and we would have been worse off for it. But I just think this is just a real embarrassment, this video. It just makes Linux just seem like amateur hour to me.
It's a long list and a big bunch of things that makes Linux seem like amateur hour, and it's a shame because that's, the Linux Foundation, it has a big job, but really it has one job, and that is to promote Linux and be the guardian of the Linux kernel. I just think they can do a lot better.
Yeah, so if I was to have taken that video, if someone had said, please do a video that basically says, without Linux, we wouldn't have been able to search whatever mundane question you have, I'd rather than saying, without Linux, you wouldn't have been able to do it at all, I'd have said, well, with Linux, these are the times that you hit it. And like, have like a little ting note every time you hit Linux. So for example, you pick up your phone, there's Linux on that. Your router gets used, there's Linux on that. The ISP's server, the Google mainframe, bang, 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 all through the system, there's Linux throughout it. And rather than saying, without it, there'd be nothing, you should be saying, with it, currently, everyone is using it every day, and promote the fact that it's there and about and abundant. And I just think they've sort of taken it the wrong way, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I thought I was going to get actually when I clicked on the link "World Without Linux." That because Linux is so all pervasive and all around us, I thought that your example there, that's how I would have done it.
When some slightly more controversial news, unfortunately, that Sarah Sharp, who is a kernel maintainer, or in fact, should I say, was a kernel maintainer, has recently stepped down. So she did maintain the USB 3 host controller and was part of the FOSS outreach program for women. And she passed over those responsibilities. And when her time comes for being re-elected onto the technical advisory board, she's not going to stand. And she's stepping down and stepping back and stepping away from the whole kernel maintenance because she says that it's not a comfortable place to be. She doesn't like the way that words are said and she's treated. She's cited things like vile words being said, subtle sexist or homophobic jokes, and the idea that the community has a code of conduct, which we've talked about previously, but there's no specific list of behaviours to avoid, and there's a community that won't actually enforce it even if they were there. And so it's another one of these situations where maybe it filters down from the top. Maybe Linus's way of dealing with people on the kernel mailing list means that it seems an acceptable way to not only talk to people strongly on the technical side, but it also comes across as sort of quite often a personal slight. And there can be some confrontational words as to how people have suggested things should go into the kernel. And she's clearly had enough, and she's stepping down. She's written a blog post about it. And there's a whole lot of people that are saying, this should be there to highlight the problems in the Linux kernel mailing list. And a lot of people that are sort of saying that maybe she's just not thick-skinned enough.
Well, when you're part of a forum, or Facebook these days, I suppose, but pre-Facebook, it was kind of PHPBB forums and vBulletin and all that. And then someone would suddenly make a thread saying, I'm leaving, and I'm leaving because of this, that, and the other. And I would always think to myself, if you're leaving, just leave. Why make a big song and dance about it? Surely you would only do that for attention. And maybe that's a cynical view, and maybe she's done this to try and make things better for the people who are still there. But I don't know. To me, it just seems like a desperate grab for attention.
Is it a desperate grab, though? I mean, she was, from the blog post, it looks like she was planning it, or she's not just had a hissy fit and thrown her toys out of the pram. It has been a long time coming from what she said.
Oh yeah, and she's left in a responsible way. She's not just abandoned USB 3. She's, handed over the reins of the various things that she's involved in, which is fair enough. But at the same time, she could have just gone quietly into the night, as it were, rather than making a big song and dance about it. Which, it comes back to what we've talked about before, with people complaining about how Linus behaves on the mailing list and others trying to emulate him. And even Matthew Garrett now has kind of said that he's had enough and he's not going to be continuing. And is there need for reform is the question. And I honestly don't know. I mean, code quality is absolutely king in the Linux kernel. And so they won't put up with any dodgy code, and anyone who tries to submit any dodgy code will be told that it's dodgy in no uncertain terms. And so you have to have a very thick skin to get involved in Linux kernel development. And the question is that a bad thing or not?
See, now you've used two phrases, no uncertain terms and thick skin, and both of those I think should be entirely unnecessary in what is something that people are doing out of their choice or they're being paid to do. But I mean, they've chosen that line for their career and they're doing something which they think is good and useful. And we've just discussed how many times you use Linux when you Google something simple. And yet you have to build a thick skin because people are aggressive and confrontational. And I've looked at a lot of the Google Plus and some of the posts that are on Reddit and things like this regarding this entire topic. And very quickly, snide remarks come in, not at her, but at other people who are posting, and, little quips and, oh, you don't know this, and why would you say that? And you don't, and it's very interesting as to, despite the fact that the whole point is about this lady leaving, it sort of loses the thread of that and quickly gets into a tit for tat as to who's this and who's that, and oh, I know this and you don't know that. And I just feel that it sort of is, it's weird that the whole point is that she's leaving because people can't be polite and friendly about things. And even in the blog posts regarding this, people are at each other's throats for what seems like relatively little reason. And I can sort of see why she's doing it.
Yeah. How long was Sarah Sharp a contributor to the kernel for? Because I get the impression it's years rather than months or weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, years, yeah.
Right. So if she's been working on the kernel mailing list with those people for years, that sort of suggests to me that her skin is plenty thick enough already. That she's been able to hack it and do it and meet the technical requirements and rub along adequately well with other people who are also contributing. This is not, I don't know, it's not that she's just suddenly become offended by something. She's just had enough, which is fine.
Yeah, but should she have made such a fuss about it is my question. Or should she have done it quietly and just left and said, if I don't like the way you do things, so I'm not going to participate anymore?
Well, does the kernel developers list have... do they have exit interviews? Do they have a HR department to which you can share grievances with? Or, I don't know. Does she have a line manager that she can discuss things with? Probably not. Probably no to all those things. So in the nature of Linux being distributed and over the internet and a community as much as a project, I think probably, yeah, this is the right way for her to get her grievances out there.
This maybe reflects on how I see things as well, because line managers, exit interviews, all those phrases are exactly what I know from industry. And you're right, if the only way that you deal with these people is through emails, and then you just stop emailing one day, having correctly handed over the reins to various things, no one's going to know that she left because she was annoyed with everyone. No one's going to know that she left because she had spent years, maybe not directly taking abuse, but just shrugging and sighing at the number of times that, as she puts it, vile words, subtle sexist or homophobic jokes, things like this, dare I say it, a bit of a boys' club. And she has to say a parting shot before she goes, and other people might look above the parapet and say, actually, yeah, this has gone on too long. However, I cannot see this changing it. I cannot see it ever changing, certainly not with Linus at the helm and the way that he deals with things. And I know a lot of people think that's the right way of doing things, because if you're doing something wrong, you should be told in no uncertain terms. You should be told directly. And if that's bluntly, then bluntly is it. And a lot of people are clearly still on the kernel mailing list and are working with it. And look at the result. You can't disagree. It's not working.
Yeah, okay, well, you've convinced me. I'm wrong. So let's move on to the joyful news that the Free Software Foundation has turned 30. Not much else to say about it, really.
Organizations that started 30 years ago will turn 30, yeah.
Well, it's funny how the Free Software Foundation is kind of similar in a way to the Linux Foundation, but it also feels very different, doesn't it?
Yeah, I imagine the chief executive of the Free Software Foundation pays himself an awful lot less than Jim Zemlin does.
Yeah. And
the Free Software Foundation isn't sponsored by Intel and Microsoft.
Yeah.
A few minor details there.
Although they do have some proprietary software companies sponsoring the Free Software Foundation in a shocking piece of hypocrisy.
Hey, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. The Free Software Foundation, and particularly Richard Stallman, I know that the two are not completely coterminous, but some of their tactics make me think of a cartoon, a political cartoon from about 100 years ago about the suffragettes, where there's a witch-faced harridan shouting and haranguing the men, and then a sensible, well-dressed woman takes her to task and says, "You think you help our cause? You're its worst enemy." The Free Software Foundation, I don't know. Sometimes I think they get their tactics very wrong. The DDoSing of Mac stores. I know that was a long time ago, but I think if they could just be a bit more pragmatic, they'd be more effective. But then, if they were more pragmatic, they would cease to be the Free Software Foundation.
Exactly what I was going to say. You need to have that polar force pulling things towards that extreme to make things, to make pragmatism exist. Because if everyone was pragmatic, then there wouldn't be a word for it, if you know what I mean. You need to have these extreme views.
Well, if everyone was pragmatic, then the one extremist left would win.
Yeah.
Yeah, congratulations, Free Software Foundation.
Indeed. Here's to another 30 years, eh?
Yeah.
And maybe in 30 years we'll all be using the herd.
You mean you're not already?
Oh, I tried it once. Never again.
Yeah, I've tried it twice. I'm leet.
I'd rather use macOS.
And that brings us on to Google and the shocking news that they're releasing some new hardware. Android 6 Marshmallow is about to hit us in the face, and you can also get images if you want to flash your phone for the Nexus, for various Nexi.
This new version, which I put on my Nexus 7, is significantly better. There are quite a lot of things that are better about it. I mean, like the permissions, the modular permissions, for example, whereas instead of you install an app and you have to give it all the permissions under the sun, now it's when you open the app, as it requires the permissions, you say yes, and then you can actually retroactively go and deny those permissions as well. So I think that is a pretty important step forward. And something that I haven't seen very much of in the various reporting is this new thing in About Phone, which is Android security patch level, or About Tablet. And if you've got the latest version, it says October the 1st, 2015. And so that means that you know how up to date you are with the security patches, which we talked about. But I mean, before we get onto the security woes of it, have you had a chance to check it out, Jesse?
No, but I was fascinated to hear the fact that you didn't have negativity about it, given your hatred of Lollipop.
Well, it's like they've taken Lollipop and improved it. I mean, instead of when you put your phone on completely silent and tell it not to vibrate, your alarm doesn't go off. They've finally fixed that. And they've improved battery life. They've improved the permissions. They've improved the reporting of how up to date you are security wise. So I'm actually surprisingly uncharacteristically positive about this one. Yeah.
It sounds like it's not really a full point release. You know, it's gone from 5 to 6. It sounds like these things should have been in Lollipop originally, because they're still a material design. They still looks the same. You know, you've now got a vertical scrolling app drawer, which has come onto my Motorola already. And I think they've sort of maybe taken some ideas from Apple, dare I say it, and incorporated them into Android. And we'll come on to the fact that there's a new release of Android x86, which is only to Lollipop. So they're still trying to catch up. I just feel that Lollipop hasn't had very long in the sun, and they've already moved on to M. But maybe it's just one of those things that having something new and shiny and calling it a new name and a new number makes people interested again and pulls them into Android.
Well, to be fair, it doesn't look very different. There are a few subtle little differences, but there's a lot of difference under the hood with it. Specifically security-wise, I mean, the byproduct of the extra security is it's now much harder to root and put custom ROMs on, which is a big downside of it, to me at least. But to the average consumer, I think it's probably better. It's kind of like the secure boot debate, but most people won't ever exercise the freedom to change their operating system, so you may as well make it as secure as possible. But I think it's much more under the hood changes here than aesthetic ones.
The permissions improvements that you mentioned, Joe, that sounds like a really big deal to me. I was skeptical of how anyone could be interested in new versions of Android. But I think I installed a guitar tuner last week, and it wanted my location and other stuff.
Yeah.
Like, why? Just like a list of things it needs access to, and then 4 or 5 different bits of information that get relayed back to Google. I mean, the ability to turn that off, or just to pick and choose the bits that you actually need in order to, tune my guitar would be great.
Yeah, like it needs access to the microphone. That's quite clear. But location and stuff, why would it possibly need that? That's just ridiculous. So, yeah, that's one of the standout features for me, and something that has been in CyanogenMod, which I'm running on my OnePlus One, or something similar at least, where you can deny permissions. But it's good to see it in the main version, and I really hope that it makes it through the OEM versions into the likes of Samsung and the mainstream phones.
You would think that that Google would be trying a little bit harder to produce one single flagship version of Android. You sent around some information before we recorded this about the way that the Android market is being so fragmented. I mean, there are still people out there using the very first version. Was it frozen yogurt?
Yeah, well, not the first version, but the kind of first mainstream one. Yeah, 2.2.
Right, 2.2.
Yeah, and not many, but there are some people. But it's basically almost kind of almost a third for Lollipop, Jelly Bean, and Kit Kat, which really doesn't look good when they're trying to already move on from Lollipop. I mean, it's I suppose Lollipop's actually more like a quarter, really. So the fragmentation is still a huge problem.
And one that seems like it's only going to get bigger if they keep on releasing stuff at this rate, and people are unwilling to throw their old phones away that they might have paid hundreds of pounds for. Strangely.
Well, I mean, take the Nexus 4, which they stopped selling, I think, only 3 years ago, or not even 3 years ago, and that already has been abandoned in terms of new Android versions, despite the fact that some community member managed to cobble together a version which I've put on my Nexus 4 and works perfectly well. So Google could have done it, but they just assumed that people throw their phones away, as you say. Whereas if you look after your phone, if you have it in a case or don't drop it, then there's no reason really why it can't last 4 or 5 years. Like a laptop, you wouldn't expect to change your laptop every couple of years, but for some reason, money, they've convinced people that they need to change their phone every year or two. So yeah, and you're right. The more versions they release and the quicker they develop it, the worse this fragmentation is going to get. But at least with the Nexus 4, they have said that they will provide monthly security patches, and Samsung also agreed to that. But that's something Jason McKenzie, who is the American division president of HTC, says is just unrealistic. And so HTC are not going to sign up to it. And he's basically implying that the likes of Samsung won't be able to deliver on that promise of monthly updates, especially given you have carriers involved. I mean, I just buy phones outright, so it's not really an issue for me. But most people have got to deal with a carrier or network, as we would call it in this country, as well as the OEM like Samsung. So you just end up with this nightmare situation that there's not really a lot they can do about it, I don't suppose, Google.
So just moving slightly away from Google, there has been a new open source initiative which is trying to replace Google Play services. So the problem with a lot of applications at the moment is that while you can get free Libre open source software versions of them, a lot will try and pull information from Google Play services. So if you want to properly open Android version, a lot of applications won't work, even though you haven't got the proprietary parts, and it's the reason that you haven't got the proprietary parts. So what this chap Marvin has done is make a Google Apps, which is basically the Google Play Services section, free and open. So the framework he's created is called MicroG GSM Core, which needs a more snappy name. But you can run it on a custom ROM. So normally when you install a custom ROM, you'll install the custom ROM and then install this package called GApps, which is all of the Google apps and Google Play services. And he's trying to replace all of those. So this currently runs with all custom ROMs from 4.4 or later. And it works with things like authentication, location, and cloud messaging. Support for Maps is partially working, and he's currently working on support for Google Cast, Google Plus, and the wearable technologies. And the important part of this is that a lot of people certainly, communicate with us and have communicated online about the idea of having an Android phone which is properly open source. But the big hurdle is this Google Play services, because so many things channel through it that you have to have it on your phone for it to really be usable. And so the idea of having an open version of it means that you could actually have a very usable Android phone and keep it open source. So I think this is quite a positive story.
Generally speaking, though, the kind of applications that are going to require Google Play services are going to be proprietary. So if you're going to run a proprietary application, then does it really matter that you've got proprietary Google Play services running? In some ways, I think that the more we can get away from Google Play services, the better. And having a FLOSS version of it is just going to kind of mean that people are more likely to write applications that rely on it. And it's never going to properly work. It's like wine, isn't it? Where it's like it almost works quite well, but it's not 100%. It's not like running things in Windows. And that's probably a bad analogy, but I don't suppose that it's ever going to be quite as solid as Google Play services. So in some ways, I'd rather not see it. I'd rather kind of it went away, but I suppose that's just a bit of a pipe dream. And the more open source free software we've got, the better. So yeah, maybe it's a good thing. Well, a bit of kind of good news that I alluded to earlier is that, at least in America, Chromebooks are doing better than iPads in schools. Only just about, though, because by the third quarter of 2014, there were figures that showed Apple shipped about 700,000 iPads and Google shipped 715,500 Chromebooks. So it's fairly close, but it shows that Chromebooks are winning. And it's not just in schools, it's everywhere, isn't it? People who want a laptop generally want a Chromebook because of all of the benefits of it. And I know there's a lot of proprietary stuff there, but again, it's like Android. At least it is Linux on the desktop. It's Linux in people's hands being used and being mainstream as well, rather than this weird niche product that, a few million people the whole world over use at best. Chromebooks are just flying off the shelves, and whereas normal laptops are just not anymore. People don't really want Windows anymore. And I'd rather people used Chrome OS than Windows, really. I know I would.
I'd also, as a taxpayer, I'd much rather pay for Chromebooks than iPads.
Definitely. Yeah.
The fact that if your kid can use an iPad, it doesn't mean that they're a technical genius. It means that the fellow that designed the iPad is a genius.
Yeah.
It's the use of iPads in schools is just wrong on so many levels. I mean, forget the fact that it's proprietary software and expensive. It locks everything down. And I've been to the education conference last year in Manchester that there was some Raspberry Pi presence at that, so I toddled along, and there were so many, like augmented reality things. So you've got a textbook, you hold your iPad over the textbook, and it gives you sort of an animated version of the illustration on the page of the book, and people were touting this as, it's great that for kids to learn about technology. It's not. It's absolutely not. You're not learning about technology. You're just using it, and you're using it to do something entirely frivolous. At least with a Chromebook, as well as being cheaper, as well as being Linux, you can get more use out of them. I mean, yeah, they are. For all that they are cut down versions of Linux machines, they are so much more versatile than an iPad.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, especially if you hack it like I have with mine and actually put proper Linux on it. But even so, even in Chrome OS, you've still got access to a terminal if you want it. And yeah, it's not just this consumer device. It's potentially a creative device, albeit a fairly dumbed down one, but nowhere near to the point of the iPad. So yeah, definitely good news.
Well, hang on a minute. All that a Chromebook is access to the internet. I mean, you said there's a terminal on there, but you can't really do a lot with it unless you sort of get to the full terminal, which is outside of the Chrome shell or the Crosh, or I can't quite remember. And you're saying, yeah, okay, you hacked yours and there's more functionality, which is absolutely right. You get far more if you've hacked it. But one of the real reasons that people are using these, or schools using them, is that they're easier to manage, they're easier to update. So you don't have to go through a full push update. They just update on their own. And so, there are other benefits, like there's Google Apps for education and there's Chrome OS for education, things like this. You don't need antivirus programs. There are good reasons to use them. But I don't think that they are the sort of all-enabling technology teaching device that we're maybe trying to sell them as. I mean, things like the Raspberry Pi, of course, is much better. It's got some hardware you can plug into. You can try and work out how to program for that hardware and things like this, how to get things working. Whereas I think, isn't a Chromebook just like a tablet with a nice keyboard?
Well, even if that's all it is, it's a tablet with a nice keyboard that's significantly cheaper than an iPad and that is running Linux at heart.
Yeah.
So that's a big enough win for me.
Yeah, it's a big enough win, but it's still not as big a win as I'd like to see. But, you have to take the victories where you get them, as small as they are.
Fair enough. Well, just rounding off the sort of Android and Google news, we covered it in a previous show on a review, and I mentioned it earlier, and this is the Android x86, which is basically Android on your home PC, has released an RC. So it's RC1 of 5.1. They've released an ISO and an IMG. You can load it on 64 or 32-bit, and it's got useful features like OpenGL hardware acceleration, and now you can load it onto a UEFI bootloaded laptop or hardware, what have you. It's got multi-touch support and other things. So they're clearly moving on. But as I touched on, they're just catching up with Lollipop, and already Android and Google are moving on to Marshmallow.
Yeah, it's weird how they seem to always be almost exactly one release behind. I'm pretty sure the last one, 4.4, came out around the time that 5.0 came out. So they seem to take their time with it, and we didn't give it a very good review last time, but maybe once they get beyond the release candidate into a proper release, we'll come back to it. But I did actually check it out briefly, and it does seem to be quite good, and it is just what you'd expect, Lollipop on your laptop, pretty much. So yeah, if you're interested in that, do check it out.
It's an awesome project. It really is. Like you said earlier, the Android is in a million pockets. It's by far the most widely used version of Linux out there. And if people can get it on the desktop, then that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Well, potentially it is, rather. I mean, if it's just a cut down kiddie version of your usual operating system, then it's not great.
Well, it is pretty much full on Android. Everything that you can do with a tablet, you can do with this, except for there might be some apps that aren't compiled for x86 because there's only an ARM version. But they seem to be increasingly fewer and farther between the ARM only. So generally speaking, it is a full Android experience. But just like Android's that little bit ropey on a phone, it's that little bit ropey on a laptop, in my experience. Although I've got a little touchscreen VivoBook, which is really nice with it. It's effectively a tablet with a keyboard, which is very nice. Well, moving on to the odds and ends then, and a blog post that caught my eye by Riccardo Padovani was asking the question, how many Ubuntu phones are there? And I put this link in, and then suddenly appeared a note from you, Jesse, saying that you weren't very convinced by the numbers here. So over to you, I suppose.
It's the method he's used. So fair enough. It's never easy to work out, how many versions of Linux are running, and in this case, how many active Ubuntu phones there are. So what he's done is he's somehow got the data for the stock calculator app that comes with the phone, and he's therefore going to use that as a way of measuring who updates it, and therefore those people that updated it he can count, and that tells him how many people have an Ubuntu phone. And if that was it, And if everyone had that app and everyone updated it, it'd be fine. But the problem is that A, you can uninstall apps and reinstall whatever you like. So there are 3 alternatives to the stock. There are actually 4 basic calculator apps on the Ubuntu phone. So if anyone has changed that application, it won't show up in his numbers. Also, his numbers are up until the last update, of course, because once the last update has happened, no one is going to update their phone. So that was in, I believe, July of this year. So his numbers are only up to sort of July. After July, the phone has been on sale in other parts of the world other than Europe, which, let's be honest, is quite a big bit of the world that we're just going to ignore. Also, if the user doesn't update their phone apps, so if, I assume you can do a bulk update, and so it updates all your applications. But if you don't do that and you just let the phone get those pushed out, so with the Ubuntu phone being a lot of updates going on, and even to the core, lots and lots of things are happening, that they're pushing out every 6 weeks or so, he reckons, full updates to the phone. And within that package, all the core applications get updated. So this includes updating the calculator application that he's using as his reference point. But if that happens, he doesn't get information on whether or not that application has been updated. So if someone isn't updating their apps and they get a push for their whole core update, then he doesn't actually get information either. So there's like all of these holes in it, and he just sort of guesstimates that, well, if I've got this data, then I'll say that 30% on top of the numbers that I have are the numbers that I want to look at, and I just don't understand where he's decided to go this from. And then what gets me is that the numbers that he have is that he has 17,979 users. So he multiplies that by, increases that by 30%, he gets to 23,000. But no, he claims 25,000, which in fact is 40%. So I don't understand why he's dealing with these numbers and then sort of moving them around and just the number of variables and the variability of those variables is so big, and it's such a thumb in the air, a finger in the air trying to work out what's going on. It is just the worst way I've ever heard of trying to get any numbers for working out who's using the phones. It just seems ridiculous. Anyway, he comes up with a number of 25,000 users.
So it sounds like you think it's more like the 300 million that Mark Shuttleworth wants then.
What do I think? Is it higher or lower? I think it's higher. I think it's significantly higher, yes. So I'm not saying that they're up at 300,000, but I think they are definitely higher than 25,000. Because let's say I'd bought a phone and I just let it do its thing. With my Android phone, it just does its thing. And the only reason I have to go in and manually update is when the permissions change. And so I have to say, yeah, I accept those permissions, move on. But other than that, it just updates in the background. And so I wouldn't necessarily update my Ubuntu phone, as an average user. And so all of those people who are like me won't be recorded in his stats. And for the other reasons I ranted about, I just don't think this is a remotely sensible way of trying to get numbers out of it. So it's an interesting point of view, and it's an interesting topic. And I know that we always talk about distro watch as a way of recording what's the most popular distribution and how many people are using it, but you can't use it. But this is way worse.
So we're all agreed that that's a big bunch of nonsense then. What isn't nonsense is Reglue, which I must confess I'd never heard of until a few minutes ago. It's a non-profit organisation that provides... what do they provide?
Well, they provide PCs for people, families, children, everyone who is unable to afford to have the internet and have PCs and laptops in their homes. So they will get PCs, let's just group those all together, whether it be laptops or actual physical PCs, and they'll get them from people who donate them, take them apart, maybe refurbish them if needed, make sure the parts are all working, and specifically that they work with Linux, and then install Linux on them. I believe they're on Ubuntu, and then send them back out. And it's a completely charitable service. They're that funny number thing they have in America for confirming they're a charity. And it's one of the things where people donate, they make sure that they're running smoothly and can give them back out to the people who need them, who otherwise would be, as our example from much earlier, driving to the library to look up things on Google or helping their children with homework and things. So it's a beautiful way of people who have too much because they upgrade their laptop every 2 years, as Google wants you to, or what have you, unable to give it to the people who need it. The problem they have is that the car they're using for driving these laptops to people, or in fact driving the members of Reglue to the various user groups and functions and things, has just got to the end of its life, and the repair costs are way too much. So they're asking that people donate so they can put a down payment on a new car, and they can continue doing it. So this is basically a bit of a plug, a bit of a shout out to the community to say, look, these guys are doing a really good job, and if we can help people who need it, people who financially can't afford their own PCs, to use PCs as we do, and the opportunities that come with them, look up Reglue. They're doing a great job, and just see if we can get some money to them so they can buy a new vehicle.
It's not just that, though, is it? I mean, they've also lobbied against that awful law that they have in the United States that makes everyone compelled to be silly, the DMCA. So they're as well as giving out Linux on these refurbished machines, they're also fighting the good fight. And that car, that's done 300,000 miles. That's really, really impressive. So not only are they, giving new life to old hardware, they're keeping an old car going for far, far longer than it should. It just wants to die and go to Sugar Candy Mountain. So they've in 11 days on Indiegogo, they've managed to raise $1,275 and their target is $5,000, which seems eminently reachable.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you, with your successful crowdfunding campaign? You assume that everyone is successful like you were.
We were something like the second most successful UK crowdfunder. I don't know.
Oh, he's just showing off now. Just showing off.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it will make its goal and then some, because it is a really good project. So, have a look at that.
So rounding off our news articles this week is the release of Jessie for the Raspbian. And it's been remastered, so it's got all of the benefits of Jessie, which I should point out to all our listeners is Jessie for the female cowgirl, whereas Luddite Jessie is Jesse, just putting it out there. And we will actually not be talking about it very much here because Joe and I will be doing an in-depth review of it next week. So stay tuned for that. And with that, that's the news done.
Yeah, let's move on to the interview. I'm now joined by Les Panda, who's a freelance author and teacher and one of the main organisers of OggCamp. So welcome, Les.
Hi there.
So can you give me a brief overview of what OggCamp's about then?
OggCamp is a weekend unconference which is full of fun and social activities. It's based in Liverpool, and for the entire weekend there's talks, there's workshops, there's lessons, there's a nice social track where you can go and have a beer with someone that you've never seen before. You can do whatever you want, but it's all about community. That old John O'Bacon phrase, community, community, community. It's all about community. So getting people under one roof so they can all chat about their favourite subjects. It could be free software, it could be Arduinos, it could be hardware, it could be ballooning, it could be anything they want. As long as they're all together in a big community. Brill. Love it.
Okay, so you've said where it is in Liverpool. When is it?
October 31st and November the 1st. So we've got a nice Halloween vibe for the weekend, including the crew t-shirts, which are going to have big green werewolves on them, which look really cool.
Okay, and the Friday night as well is kind of an informal kind of drink night as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always a legendary Friday night where everyone meets up in the bar and drinks far too much, and then the next day they're all comatose with hangovers for the opening talk, which is usually just fire safety instructions, so it's all fine. But yeah, that's what happens every time. You'll guarantee someone will drink far too much and be on the beanbags the next day. But that's the whole thing again, community. We're all there. It's a little holiday for geeks.
Yeah. Now, so you mentioned that it's an unconference. What exactly does that mean then?
Well, an unconference is where you have a venue that has space to provide rooms for people to talk in, but you have no scheduled speakers. So typically when you go to a conference, you know it's 10:30 in room A. There'll be someone talking about some subject. At an unconference, we have the room, we have the venue, but we haven't got any speakers. So the people who turn up on the day are the speakers. So you come along with your fantastic idea for a talk. So it could be Nagios, it could be Python, it could be Raspberry Pi, whatever you can think of. You put a note on the board, say I'm going to talk about this in this room at that time, And if people want to turn up, they'll turn up. They'll listen to your talk, and if they like it, they'll stay. If they don't like it, the rule of a bar camp or on conferences, if you don't like it, stand up, go out the door, but do it respectfully.
Okay, now, in previous years, apart from last year, there was some software doing this, but that kind of broke last year. Presumably, there's going to be an effort to make it work well this time.
In previous years, we've used Campfire Manager, which was John Spriggs's baby. Unfortunately, John's not going to be working on that this year with us, so we're not going to be using Campfire Manager. We're still looking for a suitable solution. Now, it could be something really simple digitally. We're not too sure what it could be, or it could be simply Post-it notes on a wall.
Okay, that worked pretty well last time, except for, I remember Popey did a talk about the Ubuntu phone, and it was so rammed that you couldn't even get in there. So a software solution would be good, but I know it's kind of, it's coming up soon, so it might be a bit late for that.
Yeah, the beauty of Campfire Manager is it looks at how many people want to go to the talk based on a voting system. So if a lot of people vote for a talk, that talk will go from the smallest room all the way up to the largest room based on the number of people voting, which is a great way of organising the conference. All the votes are locked roughly 15 minutes before the session starts. With a Post-it note solution, you're quite correct. You can't have that level of control. You don't know how many people are going to be coming to your talk. It could be 4, it could be 400. You just don't know. So yes, the talk with Popey last year was absolutely rammed. I was in that room, actually. It was a bit warm.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah, I was kind of outside it, trying to peer in, and managed to hear most of it at least. So, yeah, that was good. So, is there going to be a scheduled track as well then?
No, there's not going to be a scheduled track for talks. What's going to be happening is really an open hardware jam is going to be running alongside it, and that's going to be another unscheduled event. But it doesn't have talks. It's mainly just a series of tables and workshops that are going on. And the workshops are not ones you have to book into early. You can just turn up and people will help you as you go.
Yeah, I remember seeing a lot of soldering and kind of Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and stuff.
Yeah, soldering at OggCamp, that's got a very checkered history. That I remember the first year we did it was in 2011 at Farnham Maltings. And there was this gentleman there who I didn't know from Adam, and he decided to start soldering right next to the smoke alarm. Which, knowing the insurance policy we had, it said you can't really do anything with a naked flame or anything really hot in a building. So I put him in the car park with a soldering station, and the whole session ran there. And that turns out that was Ken Boak, who did the Nanoed Arduino boards a few years ago. He's now a good friend of mine. Hi, Ken. But yeah, we had to do that very quickly for the smoke alarms, just in case. But yeah, the Open Hardware Jam's back this year as well, and that's been organised by Caroline Keep and Mark Feltham. And they're doing a fantastic job bringing together makers from around the UK to really evangelise about their topics. And in something I can reveal exclusively, it was discussed on Twitter today, very quickly, we're going to have a little challenge in the Open Hardware Jam. It's Pounder's Poundland Hackathon.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, as you know, my surname is Pounder, and I have a penchant for going into Poundland. Well, given the fact that it's October the 31st, which is Halloween, Poundland has quite a lot of cheap light-up lanterns, ghost things that make noises. So we're going to have a little hackathon over a day, and you're going to build something out of Poundland equipment using an Arduino or Raspberry Pi. Just for a bit of fun. There's no prizes. The only prize is you've built something really cool, but all out of Poundland gear.
Ah, that sounds really cool.
The whole ACCA ethos.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know with it being an unconference, you can't give me an idea of what the talks are going to be this time, but, I mean, can you give a brief overview of what the talks have been in the last few years? Yeah,
we've had loads of great talks in the past few years. We've had talks on comparing Ubuntu phone with the Firefox OS, which was a great talk last year. That was the busy one we were talking about a few moments ago. That was excellent, comparing the two mobile phone operating systems, which are, well, they've got quite a low number of users, but they are quite a passionate developer base. Other great talks from the past are from Freaky Clown, the grey hat hacker, who everyone knows on Twitter. Yeah. His talks are always oversubscribed. In fact, we had him in a room for 300 people, and he filled the room previously. That was really good. And his talks are fantastic. You're talking about how you can hack a bank, how you can keep yourself safe online, how you can hack JPEG images to show metadata to show where the photograph was taken. Really scary stuff. Some of the videos are on YouTube. You can look up and see what he does. But that's the thing about OggCamp is you don't know what you're going to get. And it's only when that weekend has happened you look back and go, that was a really good talk. And it was completely off the cuff. Some of the best talks I've been to have been ones that haven't been planned. Someone's heard something on day one and thought, oh, right, okay, I know a bit about that. And on day two, they come up and given their side of the story. Completely unplanned. Brilliant. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the lightning talks as well are quite good.
Yes, definitely. Mark's the champion for lightning talks. He's the man behind those. And yeah, they're brilliant. Just a few minutes to really pitch a good idea. You don't have to have lots of messy notes or be well prepared. Just go up, say something quickly, and just get off. That's it.
Yeah, and one question from the audience, and you quickly answer that, and then get off, and the next person's on.
Yeah, that's it. They're really good.
Yeah. And so how many people are we expecting at this year's one?
I'll give a rough approximation of about 400 people this year, I'd say.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds good. And the thing is, it's not just about open source and software and hardware. There's also a Creative Commons and free culture aspect to it, isn't there?
There is, yes. I mean, all the content that's used at the weekend, so a lot of content that's generated, I should say, is all Creative Commons. So any photographs that are taken by the team, they're all put on Flickr, they're all Creative Commons. You can go off and use them wherever you want. So if you're wanting to run your own event or wanting to show off in a magazine or a website or a blog or something, you can use our images and talk about it. You can put videos up there and do the same again. It's all about just creating something, sharing it, so people know how great an event OggCamp is. So they'll go, I think I'll go to that next year.
Yeah, it's a really great event. I mean, I must admit to being a bit selfish having you on here because I'm going, as are the other Luddites, and we just want as many people to go there as possible because the more the merrier with it. But yeah, I mean, I've gone on about it a lot, so I thought I'd get someone on who actually is involved and can, espouse the virtues of it. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on and giving us your time, Les.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Well, as you can hear, it's an excellent event, well worth going to. And something that I forgot to ask or bring up was the price of it. And it is free. Free if you want it to be, or you can pay if you want to as well. A bit like this podcast. So yeah, you can donate if you want to, or otherwise it's just free. And it's better if you get a ticket, but you can just turn up on the day if you really want to. And I'm sure they'll let you in unless it's crammed to capacity. But yeah, I will be going to OggCamp, as will you, Jesse, and you as well, Andrew.
Yeah, I'll be going along. It was great last year. That was the first time I'd been to OggCamp. I know that it was its 5th year, so I'd missed out years 1 to 4. And I felt really silly for doing so because, as soon as you get there, you realise just how cool it is.
Yeah, and it's not just about the talks, is it? I mean, I remember having a right long chat with you in the bar on, I think, the Saturday night. And it's a chance to meet people who you otherwise only ever kind of talk to on Google Plus or Twitter or whatever. So it's a great event.
Exactly. It's like Pete Cannon was saying on your last but one podcast. He's absolutely right. You just go along and meet people, like-minded people who are doing interesting things.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So Joe should also point out that Paddy's also going, and the three of us, the last time we all met together was at OggCamp, and the first time that I met Paddy was at OggCamp. So yeah, it's great to actually see these people that you talk to for us every week.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, that's the only time I've ever actually met Paddy. I mean, I know him so well from talking to him and emails and everything. But yeah, the only time that we've ever been together face to face, because he lives in the back of beyond, even more back of beyond than you, Andrew.
Where's that, Sheffield?
Something like that. So yeah, definitely come to OggCamp then. But with that, we're coming to the end of another Linux Luddites. You can email us at show@linuxluddites.com, find us on Twitter or Google Plus or the Facebook communities, or leave a comment on the website. Thanks for joining me, Andrew and Jesse, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you again next week for more Linux news, reviews, comment, and generally being grumpy.
Bye-bye from me.
Bye, campers.
See you later.